Okay, so this is the member management training for supervisors for the 2022-23 Civic Leaders AmeriCorps program. Um, Here's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So we'll go over supervisor responsibilities. We'll go over timekeeping and timesheet things. We'll talk about reports and evaluations. We'll talk about member trainings, and then there's some other FAQ stuff, and then that'll be time for you all who are on the call can ask us questions, but obviously throughout you can also put them in the chat like Carly said earlier. Before we get into the next section though, we do have some new supervisors and some new staff on our end. So I want our staff to just introduce themselves. So I'm Monique Ellefson. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the program director. But within Campus Compact, I'm also the director of network engagement. So I'll let Anya introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anya Salcedo. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the project coordinator, so I will be assisting Carly and Monique. I've done enrollment so far, but I'm still in the training. I'm the new staff.
Yes, we're very excited to have Anya on our team.
Very excited. Anya's doing great. And I'm Carly. I've been in touch with most of you. I'm the program manager for the AmeriCorps program. Been with Iowa and Minnesota Campus Compact for almost 4 years now, and just kind of the main point of contact for the Civic Leaders AmeriCorps program. So thanks. Good to see you all today.
Yes. And just a reminder, we are going to record this. So if you want to turn your camera off, that's totally fine. Just feel free to put questions in the chat as you, if you have any, as we kind of go throughout here. Okay, so supervisor responsibilities. I'm going to try to keep everything at kind of a high level because all of this is obviously laid out in like the host site agreement. And if you do happen to be a returning supervisor, this will probably just be a refresher for you, but this is just important information that we are required to train all of our supervisors on. And I think it's just helpful because who really reads the entire contract and like memorizes it? So this is just a refresher in that regard as well. So for supervision, AmeriCorps requires the following. So each AmeriCorps member has to have an assigned supervisor. That's non-negotiable. The supervisor has to be a current employee of the host site. So they have to be actually employed and they have to be in current employment status, okay? The site supervisor has to have direct oversight of an individual's service activities or their timesheets. If you don't have direct oversight, and you're just doing like timesheet management, then as long as you are meeting regularly with someone who has direct oversight of those activities, that's perfectly fine and allowable. Site supervisors must provide the necessary training and resources to members in order for them to complete their assigned service activities successfully. So, you know, all of those things. You should provide your member with the tools needed to complete their term. So giving them a computer, an office phone, office space, printing access, yada, yada. That's just, this could depend on, you know, what your, what type of position that you have. Like a full-time person, you'll probably have like a whole office set up for them. Whereas like your student 300-hour members, you might not have to, you know, do the same kinds of things. It really does depend on the position, but as long as they have what they need to complete all of their service activities, that's what you need to provide to them. Supervisors should be meeting regularly, so weekly or bi-weekly with your AmeriCorps members. That's also a requirement. If you let it go any longer than 2 weeks, then it just gets a little dicey around like, are they doing their service activities? Do they have questions or concerns? With any type of AmeriCorps position, right? They're pretty entry level, or if they, especially if they're a student, right? They just need a lot of mentoring and a lot of, I don't want to say oversight, but they just need a lot of assistance in making sure that they're staying on track and that you know what they're doing, and providing feedback regularly. But especially for full-time or half-time members, this is super important that you're just meeting regularly and checking in on things. So in these meetings, you should be discussing progress on their service activities, always try to look at the position description as kind of like your guiding document for that. Obviously check in on how they're doing kind of in the personal realm, because again, the AmeriCorps, you're kind of doing a lot of mentoring as well as supervising. You can verify their service hours, try to understand what barriers or challenges they might be encountering. So that's just a couple of things that you can do. You can obviously do more in those regular meetings, like you can do additional training or professional development in your one-on-ones with them, but that's kind of the basic kind of list that we share. And then just so you know, if there is a change in supervisor, like due to staff transition, which I mean, that regularly happens, right? Just let us know, like it's your responsibility as the host site to notify us as soon as possible. Like as soon as you know the change. I know there's going to be a lot of other things happening with staff transition, but like it says here, right, AmeriCorps requires that the member has an assigned supervisor. And if you all have transitioned that, but we haven't made the change in like Encore, if we haven't trained the new supervisor, then there's just a lot of things that we don't want to have to play catch up on if we don't have to. And we especially do not want to hear that there's a change in supervisor from the member. That just means that, you know, the communication between us as the program sponsor and you all as the host site isn't as up to par as it should be. So just always make sure that you're communicating with us as the program sponsor, okay? So some other considerations here. So AmeriCorps members are not employees of your organization, nor of Campus Compact, nor of AmeriCorps. They are deemed participants of this national service program and are generally going to be referred to as AmeriCorps members. You at your sites might have other things that you're calling them, but just know like they're not an employee. They are a participant in the program and they are AmeriCorps members. Definitely for AmeriCorps documentation purposes, never refer to them as an intern. That's like a no-no word with AmeriCorps. So just, you know, as much as you can, just try to use the AmeriCorps lingo and just always, especially in their position title, you should always be introducing them as AmeriCorps and then whatever their title is. Like AmeriCorps should always be in there just so that other folks know what type of position they're in, but also, right, AmeriCorps is the national program, has a lot of those prohibited activities, and they're there for a very specific purpose. So they're not just a regular student worker or anything like that. They should always be introduced as an AmeriCorps member. As their supervisor, you should really help and act as like their advocate with other staff at your campus or at your organization, because other staff haven't received the same kind of training and support from us that you have. So this could be, you know, introducing your AmeriCorps members to other staff and kind of explaining what their role is and what their responsibilities are. Other staff should really not be asking your AmeriCorps members to do something that is not in their position description and that list of approved service activities. AmeriCorps members, and we'll get into this more with the timesheets, but they're only allowed to do what's in their service activities in their position description. So that's where you kind of have to act as that advocate between other staff who don't really know the nuances and your AmeriCorps members, because you're just kind of adding an additional layer of protection for their time and in their service. Something else that supervisors can do is kind of act as like a liaison. So obviously they're going to be new, they're in this temporary position. So helping make like formal introductions with other staff or folks in the community, like anyone on campus that you're asking them to reach out to, you should also always be willing, if you're asking them to reach out to someone, to kind of make that first formal, like, hey, so-and-so, like, this is my AmeriCorps member, can you help them with XYZ? That can just really help open the doors and give more legitimacy to what an AmeriCorps member might be asking of other staff if they're like, well, who's this random person I've never heard of, kind of a thing. Communication is key. So this table is actually from your host site agreement, but I put it here just so it's like a quick reference. So just always communicate with us, like what's happening on your site, but this is like an official reporting timeline. So within 24 hours, we should generally know if the member has been injured during service and needs to file workers' comp with us. We as the program, even though they're not an employee, we have workers' compensation insurance coverage for all AmeriCorps members, whether they're paid or not. If they're injured during their AmeriCorps service. If there's any like behavioral issues, particularly around like if they were arrested or if they're harassing others, then you should report to us immediately, because those kinds of things, right, might result in immediate dismissal from their program. It says employment, but it shouldn't say that. So obviously if the member files a grievance with you at the site or even with us, like we will communicate with each other, hopefully within 24 hours, knock on wood, stuff like that doesn't happen, but they do have that available to them. Any AmeriCorps members who are performing prohibited activities, you should always let us know. If you are asking your member to do something and you aren't sure if it like goes into prohibited activities, this is an instance where AmeriCorps will never grant forgiveness, so you should always ask for permission. And we try to phrase it with our AmeriCorps members that way too in the orientation, is like, if you aren't sure of something, you should always ask first before you do it, because that will be a lot smoother than like if they go ahead and do something or you ask them to do something and then it comes out that it's unallowable and we have to unlock timesheets, we have to document everything. Like, always ask for permission, never ask for forgiveness, because AmeriCorps unfortunately will just not grant that. Okay. Yes, if they fail to report for service, so if they're not like coming to their regularly scheduled shifts and they're not communicating with you, you should definitely let us know as soon as you can, just so we can make sure that they're still active in their term. If they have any behavioral issues that result in disciplinary action, definitely let us know within 2 business days, just so we're keeping in the loop of how things are going, because you're the one supervising them. We're not supervising them, so we only know what you or the member tells us. So just keep us in the loop. If your member requests to be exited for cause, compelling circumstance, or to be suspended, so this is exiting for cause is like if they just want to resign, that's fine. Or if they are like, if they just started their term and they're like a week in, they haven't gotten that many hours in, that would be an exit for cause because they haven't served, an appropriate amount of hours. Compelling circumstance and suspension, those are things that are kind of like life-changing, like if there's a death in the family, if the member is seriously injured and can't, needs to recuperate, if they're having a surgery, things like that we can either suspend their term or pause their term temporarily, or we could exit them early for a compelling circumstance. And then they would receive a prorated amount of their education award if we were to do that. So always let us know as soon as you can, especially for suspension, because we cannot suspend someone after the fact. So this has happened a couple of times over the last few years where someone needs to have like a surgery or like a serious procedure done. They tell us after, in like a week or 2 after. And at that point, it's too late for us to backtrack and document a suspension, because you really should have notified us and the member should have notified us before that happened. Obviously, there are some emergency circumstances that like we're not going to be your priority, but we should know hopefully within 2 business days, as it says here, or as soon as you're able to notify us. And then if there are any changes to the position description or the member service amendment, like anything that could impact the member service activities, just let us know as soon as you can so we can get that documentation updated, and then their hours are protected in what they were being asked to do. Okay, AmeriCorps timesheet. Super fun stuff here. So hours versus service term. So members must complete their minimum required hours. So for full-time members, that's 1,700 hours total throughout their entire term. Half-time, that's 900 hours. Minimum time is 300 hours, and then abbreviated time is 100 hours. So that's their minimum required hours for their entire service term. Okay. We do encourage all members to serve additional hours beyond that minimum requirement, just to kind of have a nice cushion is what we call it, in case in an audit situation, if there was to be like a finding on a timesheet and the auditor was like, I don't trust that number. And then like, it's 3 or 4 years down the road and no one can really remember what were you doing on X day, right? You don't have additional documentation at your site. If those hours were to be removed, if they were to then drop below that minimum threshold of hours, they could have to pay back their education award. And if they receive a living allowance, a portion of their living allowance. So we don't want any of that to happen. That's like worst case scenario. So we always encourage them to serve an additional cushion of like 10 to 15 hours, whatever like 1 week of service would be. That's kind of the cushion I like, as much as they can. If they really can't because of other circumstances, that's fine, but just know they're going to run the risk of potentially that worst case scenario happening. So just know too, that even if your members do complete their minimum required hours, they're still expected to serve their entire service term. So in their member service agreement, and as you were working with Carly on your term dates, they have a start date and they have an end date. So if their end date is May 27th, 2023, but they complete and they've met their minimum 300 hours or whatever their term requirement is, like May 1st, they still are expected to serve that entire time, the rest of their term in May. Maybe their frequency might drop down of their hours per week because they don't have to work as many hours or the semester has ended or something like that. So there's just not as much for them to do, but they are contracted for that entire time. So we stress that with them in their orientation. And this is hopefully just a reminder for you all that just because you complete your minimum required hours doesn't mean you can just stop serving whenever you want. You have to, finish out your service term for whatever your contracted dates are. Yes, I just said that. Okay. Your members really should not be expecting to exit early. So like, let's say they're graduating this year and they're like, they graduate May 14th or whatever it is. And they're like, well, the last 2 weeks, I'm not really going to do anything. That should not be an expectation that they have. So you should really work with them on the front end to be like, what are we doing for that entire last month of your service term? And just make sure that you have a solid plan in place so that they are prepared to serve their entire term. Active service. So members must remain active in the program by submitting their timesheets on time. I'm going to go over timesheet specifics in a bit here, but this is just kind of, again, how they need to remain active in the program and what that means. So generally, members should not be submitting a 0-hour timesheet unless they're suspended for a compelling circumstance. Then that's obviously allowable because they're suspended, but they're still active in their program. It especially comes into consideration around holidays, especially winter break when it's a longer time. This year with our program design, it's a little different. So there might be 1 or 2, hopefully only 1 timesheet that might truly be a 0-hour timesheet over winter break or over the 2 holidays that are kind of back to back there. So just make sure you're communicating with us as a program and have a solid plan in place for your members' hours, because, if your members are in a 300-hour term, they're serving over 9 months, let's say, they should be doing around 10 hours a week. Well, if you have 2 weeks, so 20 hours that they are unaccounted for, you're really going to impact what they have to serve the rest of their term to make up for that lost time. So have a plan laid out. I just said that. Yes, long periods of time without their normal service hours can really put them behind. So especially right now when they're just getting enrolled and just getting started, really make sure you're monitoring their timesheets and that they're doing what they should be doing. So they're not doing only 5 hours instead of the 10 hours, because every hour that they don't do in these weeks right before winter break, especially, that's just going to impact how many hours they have to do in the spring semester. So just really keep an eye on it. And what they're serving. Okay. Timesheet logistics. So timesheets are submitted via Encore. That is what Volunteer Iowa has us use. And those are official AmeriCorps records. You are encouraged to use additional documentation locally to track and verify your hours. So the Encore system, for those that may not be familiar, it doesn't allow members to clock in or clock out. It's just a summary of how many hours they served over a day. So if they served a 5-hour shift on Monday, the 22nd, we don't really have any context for what they're doing. But you do as the supervisor, or you should. So we honestly recommend that you use like a local, like a Excel spreadsheet, or you might have a different timekeeping system that you're having them use, but just have something locally that you will keep on your files and in your records they're using to verify your hours. Because that'll also come up if we have a question and we might come to you, be like, hey, this member served like 4 hours on a Sunday. Is that allowable? Do you have documentation for that? And if you say yes, then we're good. Timesheets are due bi-weekly on Mondays for the members. And supervisors should ensure that they're submitting their timesheets on time. So they will get multiple reminders from the Encore system. You will as well for when yours are due. Supervisors should review and either approve or reject timesheets no later than 3 days after the member has submitted. So if all goes well, timesheets are submitted on Mondays, you should be approving them by Wednesday of that week. So that's kind of the best flow of things. And I think Carly also created like a time sheet chart or something that we can share with everyone too, just to kind of track it. If you cannot verify a member's hours, then you need to work with them quickly to get their time either corrected or to verify their time. So if you're like, I don't know why you would be doing 4 hours on a Sunday, like what were you actually doing? Like you should be the one investigating it, because at the end of the day, you're responsible. Like if you approve the timesheet, that's on you as the supervisor. So some more logistics. Members cannot enter their hours before they have actually been served. That is considered preloading, and it's considered falsifying a federal document, because this is a federal grant, which is also known as fraud. So that seems pretty heightened because it is, but honestly, we usually do find this, especially at the beginning of a member's term, because we stress to them that their timesheets are due. They have to submit their timesheets, yada, yada. Time is important. So then, any person would, right? You're like, I know my schedule for the next 2 weeks. So I'm just going to plop my schedule in for the next 2 weeks, and then I'll submit it by the deadline. If our grant officer were to have a monitoring audit and they found those preloaded hours of hours that were entered on a day that has not yet come to pass, that's considered a fraudulent timesheet, and they will note it and they will follow up with us, and we will follow up with you and your member. So just make sure you're keeping an eye on that. You should be able to see the date. So when they submit your timesheet to you, if they're you should be able to see the date that they submitted it. So if they submitted on the 10th, but they have hours for the 12th, you should reject it and say you have preloaded hours. But we as staff pretty much catch some of those things, but sometimes our grant officers will just do like a monitoring check, and they'll just let us know if that is happening. Members and supervisors should not be using the comment function in Encore. The comment function in Encore, while it seems super friendly, it lives forever. We cannot delete that. And then Encore is what an auditor will be looking at for member timesheets and monitoring. We cannot delete comments in Encore. So just don't use it, because certain words mean certain things to AmeriCorps, and they're not going to have any local context for whatever conversation you're having in the comment box. So just don't use it. Always communicate via email or outside of Encore. Just do not use the comment function. It's fine if you're rejecting a timesheet to put in there why, like that's fine, that's not a comment. But if you're like, oh, you did this training on this day, and it may seem really innocuous, but to an auditor it could become like a whole thing. So just always communicate outside of that official tool. If members accumulate 2 missing timesheets, we will send them an email reminder, and we will send you an email reminder, because at 2 missing timesheets, that's a month worth of time that we do not have accounted for. If they have 3 missing timesheets, so that's a month and a half, that's 6 weeks, then they will just automatically be removed from the program. Also at this point, like it's not like wow, we see 3 timesheets and we just automatically exit them. Like at 3 missing timesheets, we will have communicated with them a lot, with you a lot. I'm assuming at 3 missing timesheets, you've been trying to track them down. So for us, that's just an indicator, especially if they're unresponsive, they're just not active in the program anymore. And we do have to exit them. That's a Volunteer Iowa policy because they're not active and we cannot prove that they're active in their service. For paid members, this is different. So if they're receiving a living allowance from us, then they're considered, a paid member on our end. So if they have a missing timesheet, if they just have one, it's kind of okay. We will pay them at least once. That's our policy. But if they have 2 missing timesheets, we will not pay them for that second missing timesheet because we can't obviously pay them for things we don't know that they're doing or if we don't know that they're active. And then obviously for 3 missing timesheets, they would also be automatically removed from the program. Timekeeping reminders. So time is documented in 15-minute increments and is recorded as either 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, or 1. So that is how it should be documented in Encore. If they try to put something else in there, like 7 minutes or whatever, the system will say that's not allowable. Hours can only be counted for approved AmeriCorps activities that are outlined in their position description. So they cannot and should not be counting hours for anything else. Like if they go home for Thanksgiving break, let's say, and then they serve a meal at their local like food pantry for the holiday. That's really great. That's not AmeriCorps service. That's not allowable service activities. So they cannot count those hours just because they're volunteering. So any old volunteering is great, cannot be counted for AmeriCorps hours. Members do not have any vacation or sick time or holiday time off. So there's no like equivalent of paid time off. So if they take a day off or if they have a sick day, they just don't count any hours on that day and they'll need to either make it up or just kind of adjust their service schedule for the rest of their term. So this is where, if someone is sick or something like that, and it's like an extended, like a week-long thing, they got really hit hard with the flu or something like that, depending on what it is, and if we can get a doctor's note, then we could suspend their term so it doesn't really impact their hours. But just keep this in mind, like they should not be tracking any paid time off in their timesheets. Members are allowed to serve on federal holidays. So we have a holiday coming up with Labor Day. But if they do serve, holidays are like the first thing that an auditor will check. And so we just will get additional documentation from you to verify those hours. Well, from you or the member, and then we'll just save that in their file, because if they really did serve those hours, and depending on what they did that day, if it's allowable, then we'll keep it because it would be flagged in an audit regardless. Members must serve their minimum required hours to successfully complete their term, and that has to be exact. So obviously we want them to serve over that minimum by, a couple of hours just to have some cushion. But if they're just kind of barely scraping by to get to the 300 hours as their minimum requirement, just know that even if they're at 299.5 or 299.75, we cannot round up, we have to round down. So they need to be at exactly that minimum hour requirement, or honestly, this is where we really push that as much as they can, they should be getting hours above that minimum requirement. Because even if they are below by 0.5 or 0.25, if they're not at that minimum hour, they will not receive an education award, which really would suck if they're that close. So really just keep an eye on it, and we'll keep an eye on it too. And then here are some restrictions for member hours. And this is honestly just to protect their time as an AmeriCorps member. So they should not be serving more than 12 hours in a day, 60 hours in a week, which is also 120 hours in a timesheet, nor should they be doing 200 hours a month. So these are just things to keep in mind. The 10 to 12 hour a day range is when we will generally follow up and say, hey, we noticed you have 10 hours. Like that's kind of outside of the norm of a usual working schedule. So we'll ask for verification if they are at 10 hours. So just keep that in mind. But honestly, it's just us monitoring and making sure that they're not, misentering their hours or something like that. Okay, there is a training hour requirement. So all AmeriCorps members have to have at least one training hour which hopefully if everything, goes according to plan, knock on wood, that hour can be their first orientation with us. And they can obviously do more than the one training hour. But they just need to make sure that it's logged. We want that to be logged generally within their first or second timesheet. And again, it should hopefully overlap with our orientation or training that you are providing to them. So it's just a minimum requirement throughout their entire term. They just have at least one, but they will definitely have more than just one. And then training and encore means professional development. So any training hours logged should be documented, what exactly the training was, like what the topic was, and how does it relate to their AmeriCorps position, project, or their learning and growth within the role. So if they're just, attending a speaker on campus and, they could count that as a professional development hour. If it's something totally unrelated to their AmeriCorps term and they're like, oh, well, I'm planning to be a future whatever, so I wanted to attend this thing or I wanted to read this book, that's really great that they're doing that and they're taking that initiative. But unfortunately with AmeriCorps, all they can count is anything that relates to their service term. So you should really be monitoring what they're putting in there for training hours. It's also pretty common that sometimes they'll just enter all of their hours in the wrong column. So sometimes if they enter like all their hours in training, hopefully you'll have caught it, but we will definitely kind of flag that and say, hey, did you mean to do this? Did you really just have 2 weeks of service that was strictly training? That's pretty unusual. So generally we find out, no, that was a mistake, and then we'll work to correct it. But okay. Yes. Okay. Carly just put something in the chat that's helpful context for everyone. So reports and evaluations. Trying to keep an eye on my time here. Yeah, we're good. Okay. So your members will submit reports to us. You might have additional reports for them, but because they're in our grant program, we have certain requirements of them. So every single member will submit a 1-month progress report. And obviously that's 1 month after their term start. And that's just our way of verifying, what is their level of comfortability at that stage with like performing their assigned tasks. Do they have any questions related to AmeriCorps policies? Have they, has anything come up that they don't, have access to something they thought they would have access to, things like that. We also attach that a little quiz, so to speak, of the AmeriCorps information we cover with them and their orientation, and that's in their MSA. And that's just our way of checking, like a month in, have they retained what they need to? Do we need to reiterate anything with them or with you, just to make sure that we're all on the same page for what they should be doing within the AmeriCorps program? Member narrative reports. So these are just something that they will submit to us just to kind of give us a feel for how they're doing, what they're learning, how they're interacting with their within their position. And those are going to be submitted on a semesterly schedule. Basically, it's a little different for full-time and half-time versus minimum time and abbreviated time. So the schedule's here, and we will always communicate like a month before they're due. We'll send like, a reminder email to the students, and we'll send them to you or to your member, and then to you as well. And then members have to submit a midterm evaluation and an end of term evaluation. The evaluations are from AmeriCorps, or they're required by AmeriCorps. So for midterm evaluation, that is all paid positions. So if they are receiving a living allowance from us, they have to complete a midterm evaluation. Or any members who are serving 9 months or more in their term, they will be required to complete a midterm evaluation. If you aren't sure if your member fits into that, don't worry, because Carly or I will let you know, or Anya will keep you in the loop. End of term evaluations, those are required for every single member, regardless of position. And also the end of term evaluation is required for them to receive their education award. So if they don't submit it, their education award is at risk. So we really emphasize that end of term evaluation because that is, one of those things that an auditor will find, and they'll be like, well, you didn't submit all of your paperwork, so you don't get the education award. So And then we will send out a program evaluation, which will be in FormStack, kind of similar to that member narrative report. We'll send that all to every single member. And then, that'll happen at the end of their term, because we just want to know and gauge, like, how was their experience in the program and that kind of a thing. So grant reports. So grant reports are submitted by you or whoever the supervisor is. And so there's a few different kinds of reports here. So there's a narrative progress report that you'll be submitting to kind of capture how things are going for this first couple of months. And so that will be due in December. For the narrative progress report, it should look pretty similar for those of you that are returning. It'll look similar to last year, but whenever supervisors submit reports to us, we do a technical assistance call right before. So we'll go through it. You'll have all the questions. So hopefully, that alleviates any anxiety you may be having about submitting a grant report. Like, we are here to help you and make it like as simple as we can. So your first report will be due December 12th. The following reports are performance measure reports. And these are a little bit more formal than the narrative one, because these are actually related to our grant performance measures and what you, will be tracking. So there are different ones throughout the academic year, the grant year, kind of. So obviously not all of you will be submitting each one of these. It will really depend on obviously when your members are active. Our performance measures, right, we are tracking from semester to semester retention. So that's why there's a couple different ones here. There's one for the fall semester, the spring semester, and then obviously the summer, if there's a summer program. So for the performance measure reports, you will also be using and turning into us this tracking tool. So our performance measures, as a reminder, is counting the number of individuals who are served by your AmeriCorps members, who are their mentees, or however you're terming that. And it's also the number of individuals who are retained in college from semester 1 to semester 2 following. So individuals in this case for our program purposes is those students at your college that the AmeriCorps members are serving directly and that fit into our identified categories of, do they identify as first gen, low income, or students of color? It should be and or students of color, because obviously there's a lot of overlap with those identities. Host sites must use the performance measure tracking tool that is provided to you. And I'm going to go through that right now, and hopefully it makes sense. Let me open it up here. Okay. Zoom in here. So this is the tracking tool. I'll share it with everyone, and it will be on our website as well. So this is required, which is a little different, but again, this is a new grant for us. So this is required for everyone. And then only individuals that are receiving direct benefits from your AmeriCorps members should be tracked in the spreadsheet. So if you have a broader scope within your program and your AmeriCorps members are kind of just a piece of the puzzle for you, just count who your AmeriCorps members are directly working with in this tracking spreadsheet, because that's all that we really can claim in the grant purposes. You will be able to create a copy of this tool. Either, you do that through file, make a copy, or you can download it as an Excel document. And this also has the calendar here of when they're due. So this is what it looks like. This is the blank version. So I'm going to go to the example. So this is your tracking tool. So you'll have your institution name. And then obviously the program name is just the Civic Leaders Program. And then this is kind of how we have it set up. So AmeriCorps member over here, you'll just list out like who the AmeriCorps member is, and then the name of your mentees. If you're worried about FERPA, just pause that button, because I'm going to go through the rest of it here. So the thing that we are tracking is, are they meeting with your AmeriCorps members or your mentor? And then are they eligible were they retained? So let me talk you through it. So their student name, what year in school they are they eligible? All you have to put is yes or no. And then it lists down here, what does eligible mean? And eligible just means for us, for this tracking purposes, like, can we count them in the grant? So if your AmeriCorps member is serving folks who don't fit into those identity categories, you could still include them on here, and please do, because we are interested in knowing the broader scope of, how the AmeriCorps program is impacting your campus community. But this is where you'll indicate, can we count the individual in our performance measures? So if they're eligible to be counted in the program, then you'll say yes. And if they're not, you'll say no. We do not need to know, and please do not include what their actual identity categories or category is. Just if they fit into any of those categories as first gen, low income, and or student of color, you'll just simply say yes, and we don't need to know the specifics. What their start date was, so the month and the day of when they started meeting with your AmeriCorps members, how many meetings that they did with their AmeriCorps member, what topics were discussed. So some of this might be a little in the weeds. The topics that are being discussed is honestly for us to kind of keep track, because we will report that to AmeriCorps, but it's also for us to know what additional areas do we maybe need to identify and support you all in, or the members in, for additional like backup training or complementary training to what you're providing to them. Also, it's just for us to kind of identify. We have some things listed out here as like examples. So academic support is AS, financial planning is FP, civic identity or competencies is CI. You can obviously and will obviously expand on that. So whatever you end up doing for the topics of conversation, and I would say just identify the main themes, because if you're doing this throughout the entire semester, there's going to be a lot of things that they're talking about. So just what the main intervention strategies are, or the main ways that your members are assisting the students. Like if they're just talking about their favorite movies, like I don't need to know that. What I need to know is how are the mentors helping them be successful in college, right? So if you want to add a category in there of like personal goals, like that would be totally fine, things like that. So yes, feel free to add on to that, because we didn't want to be too prescriptive in it, but these ones for sure are kind of within our program parameters. And then the last part here is obviously what you will know once we get into the spring semester, and it's just, are they enrolled, right? So if you are worried about FERPA because your campus has like a strict lockdown policy, write in the chat, and then we'll take note and I'll follow up with you individually. But generally, from my understanding and training with FERPA, is that we only are asking what their name is because they're enrolled in your program, so you know their name. And then also, are they enrolled in school? Like those are the two FERPA categories. And so those are, at least from my training and understanding, those are allowable. If you have concerns, or if your campus policy has a stricter scope, just follow up with me and we can figure something else out, because this is required for us to document and track with the grant. But I've worked with our grant officers to come up with some other strategies. But if you can at all, use this so that we can move forward. Not move forward, so that we can track what we need to track. Okay, let me go back here. So yes, that's the tracking tool that you'll be using. I'm going to share it out with everyone in the email this afternoon, just so you have it and can start utilizing it. It's a new tracking tool that was developed by our colleague Kayla. So if you kind of make some slight modifications, or if you have some feedback on how you end up actually utilizing the form throughout, please let us know, and then we can maybe make those modifications or things like that for the for other folks too. Okay, member trainings. Yeah, we're still good on time. So we obviously will give them an orientation. By we, I mean Carly. All AmeriCorps members are required to attend this virtual orientation with one of our staff. They will most likely be on the member's first day of service or within the first 2 to 3 days. We really only like to schedule it within the first 2 to 3 days, because if it gets to 5 days or 7 or longer from their start date, there's just more risk of them doing things that are not technically allowable. So that's why we like to keep it within the first couple of days of their service term. In these orientations, we will cover the AmeriCorps basics, we'll review the member service agreement, which is their contract with us. We'll talk about prohibited activities, we'll go over the timekeeping requirements, and we'll also go over some of our programmatic goals, like our civic competencies and things like that. Some additional trainings that we're doing this year. So for minimum time members, please keep these in mind because these are required. So we're going to do a virtual program launch, and they're just required to attend one of those. So session 1 is going to be Thursday, October 13th from 9:30 to 11. Session 2, or option 2, is Monday, October 17th from 3:30 to 5 p.m. So those are required because we're going to go over some of the additional program logistics and things like that. And we also want to catch them when they're, at about a month or 2 into their term. So that's why those are required, but they're virtual. So they should be able to attend one of those 2 sessions if they are enrolled by that point, obviously. Yes, we will focus on how their term is going. We'll review timekeeping and hour tracking and hour planning, honestly. We'll provide training to them on how to build relationships with our mentees to complement what you're obviously providing to them locally. And this will include some motivational interviewing as a strategy. Civic Action Academy is our student conference that this year we're hosting in person in Des Moines. That's required for all AmeriCorps members that are minimum time. It's November 11th and 12th. This is an opportunity for them to connect with their other AmeriCorps members and learn more broadly about civic engagement, especially how it works on college campuses. So the Civic Action Academy is open to any students within the Iowa and Minnesota Campus Compact Network. So there will be folks not only from Iowa who are within the AmeriCorps program, but it'll be folks from Minnesota as well, potentially some other states. We usually in the past have gotten a couple of students from like Illinois or Wisconsin. So it just kind of depends on who was all there, but it's a really great opportunity and we're excited to have it be back in person. We will cover the cost of the expense to attend the Civic Action Academy, which will include travel and lodging. So that will be covered within our grant budget. So usually how that has worked in the past is that we reimburse campuses for any travel expenses. So if you have a cohort of students, you bring them down, you use a campus vehicle or whatnot, and then you would just bill us or invoice us for what that is, and then we would reimburse. And then we are working on getting a hotel block set up so that we would just pay for the AmeriCorps members hotel up front. So this is a requirement. Obviously, if there are extenuating circumstances for any of these required trainings, we understand, but you should notify us as soon as or the students should notify us. And we'll communicate this training schedule with the minimum time members, especially, relatively soon so they can start planning. But this is for you, and you can obviously share this information with them as well. We are anticipating doing a program launch with our full-time and half-time members. It's tentatively set for October 11th in Des Moines, but that will kind of depend on recruitment of how folks in those slots kind of go. Recruitment for full-time and half-time right now is a little slow, so we're going to keep an eye on it. But just so you know, if you have a full-time or half-time position, we're hoping for October 11th. That will be in person, obviously in Des Moines. Again, we will reimburse, so we will cover travel expenses by the program, and it will be required for full-time and half-time members to attend. Right now, we're hoping to do it in person just to kind of build a cohort model back up within our full-time, half-time positions. But obviously, depending on when we need to schedule it and how much flexibility we need to have in the moment, we will see and pivot if we have to for it to be virtual. In the spring semester, we plan to do what we are going to call like a program celebration and closing. So we will host it regionally. We will be traveling out in person to do these trainings and kind of close out the program year. We will focus on life after service, which again, we are required to do that by AmeriCorps. So that will include like helping them prepare for their exits and like, you know, here's all the paperwork and all the things you'll be doing, as well as how to use their education award and kind of those kinds of things, as well as some other hopefully more fun programming stuff. We will obviously share more details with you all and with members in the new year. And if you're interested in hosting one of these on your campus or in your region, please notify Carly or Kayla or myself. But Kayla Liftog is our main person who's like planning out member trainings. So she probably would be your best bet. But Carly obviously is kind of your main contact for most things. Okay, we're almost done. Other factors in FAQ. Member safety. So this is just something to keep in mind because it's again required by AmeriCorps. So you should be providing your AmeriCorps members with any necessary information about like the safety of their work location. So these are some things that are in the contracting to keep in mind. So the use and availability of CPR. So maybe just identifying like who in your office or in your space is like certified, or if you want your member to be certified, you can definitely do that. First aid kits and any portable defibrillators if those are available. So just identify those for your members so that they know. And obviously the location of storm shelters in your working location. And then if there are any additional site-specific safety concerns or policies that you all have, obviously make sure that you're doing that. Something to consider within this is like, if your student workers or if your employees are required to do like Title IX, mandatory reporting training, or go through a specific harassment training, even though your AmeriCorps members are not technically employees, you should really have that conversation within your higher level administrators to figure out like, do they want your AmeriCorps members who are going to be meeting regularly with students in these kind of conversations, like what kind of level of training do you want to require of them? And you can definitely do so. AmeriCorps members, I think I mentioned this earlier, but they are covered under our workers' compensation insurance policy. So if something happens to them while they're performing their AmeriCorps responsibilities, they should notify us, or you should notify us, and then we'll follow up and get a claim filed and all of that, okay? Refilling positions. So if a member were to exit early, we may be able to refill their position. Here's the language from the HSA. So refill deadlines, I mean, it's kind of convoluted. Honestly, we have enough slots this year. We should be able to cover most things. So if someone leaves, either if we refill or not, we will probably be able to re-recruit for a position. Obviously, that will depend on the type of position that you have. Full-time members who have a longer term, it's a little bit more nuanced, but most of the other position types will just depend on when it makes sense for you to have members enrolled and yada yada. Some other AmeriCorps logistics just for you to keep in mind, because those are things that we've already kind of been experiencing this year. So AmeriCorps State and National, that's the type of grant that we are. We are an AmeriCorps State program. They limit individuals to 4 terms, regardless of how many hours they have served. So if they serve four 300-hour terms throughout their years in school, so they do a term freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, then they've capped out of their 4 AmeriCorps State terms, and they won't be able to enroll into another program within AmeriCorps State. Hopefully that changes. There's a lot of advocacy being done at the at Congress level to try to change the rule, because it is kind of a silly rule, especially for programs like ours where we regularly work with college students, and then they might want to go on and do a full-time term, their year after they're done with school. So just some planning for you all to keep in mind. And then also individuals can only receive up to the equivalent of 2 full-time education awards. So they could continue serving in a term, but if they serve 2 full-time positions, that's the equivalent of 2 full-time education awards. So while they could potentially still serve because they've only done 2 terms in the program, they wouldn't receive any additional education award money. So unfortunately with the AmeriCorps State program, there's not really much of an additional benefit. Whereas if they were in a different program like AmeriCorps Vista, if they served 2 full terms or they got, their equivalent of 2 full education awards, then they could in the Vista program receive like an end of service cash stipend, I think is what they call it, which is very minimal. Like it's only like a third of what, the education award is valued at, but at least in the Vista program, they have the option. In our program or in the AmeriCorps State side of things, there's really no other option for that end of term benefit. So obviously we went over a lot of information. I see the chat kind of really going, so I'm eager to get to the chat. But here's our staff contact information. So Carly is our program manager. She'll probably be your primary contact for most things related to the grant. Anya is our project coordinator. So, Anya will be great to contact with some of those logistical pieces because she'll be doing most of the background checks and things like that. I'm the program director, so kind of higher level, like if there's a member behavioral issue, if there's a grant contract question, things like that, like the higher level or grant budget kind of a thing. And then Kayla Liftog, who I mentioned earlier, is really helping us right now with member trainings and things like that. So with that, I'm gonna stop the recording and open it for